Swallow this coffee-soaked pile of papers right now, or get ready to rot in the garbage dump. A screeching roar tore through the suffocating air inside the chief executive officer's office on the 61st floor of the Zurich Financial Tower. A steaming, smoking cup of hot espresso was dumped straight from above onto the neatly tied hair and the faded, worn uniform of the petite minority auditor. A dark, scalding liquid slowly streamed down her forehead, soaking her eyes, which were wide with humiliation, dripped onto the thick case file in her trembling hands. The notoriously powerful politician, wearing a bespoke suit worth tens of thousands of dollars, slammed his polished leather shoe onto the hem of her shirt. His twisted, predatory smile showed absolute dominance. Standing right beside him, the corrupt head of auditing sneered, locking his hands behind his back with an expression full of triumph and contempt as he watched his subordinate being ruthlessly trampled. In this ivory tower, I am the law. What right does a powerless pawn like you have to expose me? The bitter smell of burnt coffee, mixed with the expensive leather in the luxury room, created a suffocating blend, as if trying to crush the last bit of dignity of an underdog. The young woman did not cry. She did not beg. Her shaking hands suddenly clenched tightly around the pages, soaked with water and coffee foam. At the peak of this tyranny, La Sagrada Familia. When the villains believed they completely controlled a human being's fate, the timeline froze. This story was actually decided 6 months ago. It all began in the dark, damp basement of the International Private Bank of Switzerland, where the sunlight never touches. That was her world. The world of invisible people ignored by the arrogant elite. Place where dusty files hid the darkest secrets of those who called themselves high society. That small, quiet auditor, through her silent persistence, had accidentally flipped a switch. She triggered a ticking time bomb that could bring this entire luxurious ivory tower crashing down. 6 months ago, the world looked completely different for Elena. She was a young, brilliant auditor from an immigrant family who had built her life from nothing through sheer hard work. If every single day, she was the first to arrive at the Zurich Private Bank and the absolute last to leave. While the elite executives enjoyed their luxury lunches and champagne parties on the upper floors, Elena was buried in the cold, damp basement. She sat under the flickering fluorescent lights of the archive room, surrounded by mountain-high walls of dusty documents. Now, her hands were constantly stained with ink and paper dust. Zida, her eyes grew heavy and bloodshot from staring at complex financial spreadsheets for 16 hours straight. Her colleagues, born into wealthy Swiss families with elite lineages, rarely even looked her in the eye. To them, she was just an invisible ghost from a minority background, hired only to fill a corporate diversity quota. The head of auditing, Mr. Vance, made sure she knew her place every single day. He would dump piles of messy, organized receipts onto her desk minutes before closing time. He would sneer at her worn-out shoes and her simple, faded uniform that she washed by hand every night. Selena swallowed the humiliation silently, keeping her head down, because this job was everything to her. Her meager salary was the only thing keeping her younger brother in school. But beneath her quiet exterior, Elena possessed an extremely sharp, mathematical mind. She noticed patterns that others missed. She saw tiny, repeating discrepancies in the digital ledgers that the senior auditors purposefully ignored. A fraction of a percent disappearing here, mysterious shell company bank account opening there. Sagrada Familia. The elite thought she was too stupid and too submissive to notice the financial rot hidden beneath the polished marble floors. They assumed the girl from the slums would never dare to look into the dark corners of the Thapnga. They severely underestimated the quiet determination of an underdog who had nothing left to lose. Night after night, Delietwe, as the rest of the financial district fell dead silent, Elena stayed awake. The cold wind of the Swiss winter rattled the tiny, hard windows of the basement archive. She survived on cold, cheap coffee and sheer willpower. So, she began manually cross-referencing thousands of encrypted transaction codes, tracking a hidden financial artery. The trail led away from the standard corporate accounts and dived deep into the highly classified offshore VP sector. So, her heart hammered against her ribs as the puzzle pieces finally began to lock into place. She discovered a massive, sophisticated money laundering network operating right under the noses of the regulators. Over $3 billion had been systematically scrubbed clean through the bank over the past 5 years alone. The source of the dirty money was terrifying. It belonged to Senator Thomas, the Q familia, the most powerful political figure in the region. A man who built his career pretending to fight corruption. La Sagrada Familia. Every single transaction bore the digital authorization stamp of her own boss, Mr. Vance. Elena sat back in her creaking chair, her hands trembling violently as the glowing monitor illuminated her pale face. She held the financial death warrant of the city's most untouchable elites right in her hands. La Sagrada Familia. She knew that printing these documents meant entering a war against a system that could crush her like an insect. But she also knew she could no longer remain silent in the face of such absolute corruption. She carefully exported the raw data encryption keys onto a secure local drive, printed a single, redacted hard copy, and tucked it into her bag. The countdown had officially begun. Elena did not run to the police or the press immediately. She knew the rules of the ivory tower all too well. To crush giants, you must first secure an unshakable foothold. The next morning, with a pounding heart, but a laser-focused mind, she took the printed dossier straight to Mr. Vance's office. She still believed, perhaps naively, the corporate chain of command and professional ethics. Mr. Vance sat behind his massive mahogany desk, sipping his morning espresso from a porcelain cup. Elena quietly placed the file in front of him and explained the multi-billion-dollar money laundering trail linking Senator Thomas to their offshore accounts. The room fell into a sudden, deathly silence. Mr. Vance's face did not pale. Instead, a slow, predatory smile crept across his lips. Freaky, he didn't look at the data. Sagrada Familia. He looked at Elena as if she were an annoying insect that had wandered into his pristine space. You really think you did something heroic here? Don't you, Elena? Say. He slammed the porcelain cup onto the saucer with a loud clink. He stood up, towering over her. His voice became a vicious hiss. You are a minority hire from a third world family who gets paid to count numbers, not to play detective. Senator Thomas pays my salary. He pays the CEO's salary. He owns the very ground this bank is built on. Le Sagrada da Familia. Do you think anyone will believe a word from a disposable girl who lives in a rent-controlled apartment? Elena stood her ground, her voice trembling but firm, adding that the Independent Regulatory Commission would definitely care. Mr. Vance chuckled darkly, a sound empty of any warmth. He walked over to her, his shadow completely enveloping her small frame. He dropped a subtle, La Sagrada Familia, terrifying threat about her younger brother's university scholarship, which was funded by the bank's charitable foundation. And one phone call from me, Elena, and your brother is expelled, blacklisted, and your entire family will be on the street. He then ordered her to bring the original master ledger, drive up to the CEO's penthouse office at exactly 4 o'clock. He told her they would settle her employment status there, once and for all. Elena left his office with ice in her veins, realizing the trap had just been set. But as she descended in the glass elevator back to the basement, her fear slowly transformed into absolute, cold fury. They thought her poverty made her weak. It actually made her dangerous. The heavy, soundproof oak doors of the 61st floor penthouse office clicked shut behind Elena. The air inside was thick, with the scent of premium cigars and expensive leather. Senator Thomas sat on the plush velvet sofa, while Mr. Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city of Zurich. Elena stood in the center of the room, holding the printed dossier and the encrypted master drive tightly against her chest. There was no discussion in ellos, no trial, and absolutely no mercy. Senator Thomas didn't even bother to look up from his phone as he spoke to Mr. Vance. Is this the little rat trying to dig up my backyard? Mr. Vance nodded eagerly. See, Leia, snatching the dossier from Elena's hands and tossing it onto the table. Yes, Senator, just an ungrateful immigrant girl who thinks she can extort the elite. Senator Thomas stood up, his towering presence exuding absolute, unchecked power. He walked over to Elena, grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her to look into his cruel, arrogant eyes. Look at me. You pathetic piece of trash. In the city, I am the law. I am the economy. I am the future. You are nothing but a temporary shadow passing through my world. See ya. He released her chin with a disgusted flick of his wrist and picked up a steaming cup of hot espresso from the side table. Without warning, he poured the scalding black liquid directly onto Elena's head. The burning liquid streamed down her face, soaking her eyes and dripping onto her worn-out uniform. Mr. Vance burst into a sycophantic, loud laugh, enjoying every second of her humiliation. Now, swallow this coffee-soaked pile of papers right now, or get ready to rot in the garbage dump. Senator Thomas roared, kicking in the papers across the floor, forcing her toward the corner of the room. Elena stood frozen under the burning heat of the coffee, but her eyes remained fixed on the politician. The villain smiled. La Sagrada Familia, utterly convinced they had broken her spirit and erased the threat. They truly believed the underdog had been completely crushed under the weight of the elite. Senator Thomas laughed, his chest heaving as he watched the wet, shredded documents cling to the expensive Italian marble floor. Mr. Vance immediately stepped forward, grinding his heel into the remaining fragments of paper, eager to destroy every last trace of his own corruption. You are nothing, Lena. Mr. Vance spat out the words, his face twisted in a smug, victorious grin. Did you honestly believe a broken immigrant girl could rewrite the laws of this city? Elena slowly straightened her back, her small frame standing tall against the oppressive luxury of the penthouse office. She wiped the hot, sticky espresso from her eyes with the back of her trembling hand. She did not scream. She did not beg. Yea. And she did not look down at her ruined clothing. Instead, a cold, piercing calmness settled over her face, and a sharp, thin smile broke through the stains on her skin. I didn't expect you to change, Mr. Vance. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the room with the sharpness of a razor blade. That is exactly why I didn't come here alone. Senator Thomas frowned, his dominant posture freezing as he sensed a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Elena slowly raised her hand to her chest, unbuttoning the top of her stained uniform shirt. Because she did not pull out a weapon, nor did she reach for another file. She pointed directly to the second button on her collar, which held a microscopic, high-definition camera lens, disguised as a simple piece of plastic. The tiny green light on the rim of the button was flashing steadily, transmitting data in real time. This room is completely soundproof, Senator, but the internet is not. Says, eyes locked onto the politician's face, watching the color slowly drain from his cheeks. For the past 20 minutes, every single word you spoke, every threat you made, every drop of coffee you poured has been live streamed. It went directly to the secure cloud servers of the Swiss Financial Market Supervisory Authority and the International Criminal Police Organization. Mr. Vance's laughter died instantly in his throat, bulging his eyes in, as he stared at the flashing green light on her collar. Emma tapped the side of her wrist, activating her phone, which displayed a live data transmission screen showing over 300 gigabytes of encrypted evidence already successfully uploaded. The printed paper was just a distraction to make you feel safe. Gentlemen, she whispered, her voice filled with absolute, yielding authority. You thought you were destroying the evidence. You were actually recording your own confessions. Heavy, soundproof oak doors of the 61st floor penthouse did not just open. They were violently shattered inward. The other A tactical unit of federal law enforcement officers and Interpol agents stormed the executive suite, their heavy boots thudding against the marble floor. "Drop your hands. Get on the ground now." The commanding shouts echoed off the glass walls, completely shattering the quiet arrogance of the Zapnga. Senator Thomas stumbled backward, "Elle Sagrada Familia," his hands shaking violently as a laser sight painted a bright red dot directly onto his tailored suit jacket. His face was pale. His mouth hung open, in absolute shock. Zia. His political power evaporating into nothingness in a matter of mere seconds. Mr. Vance tried to scramble behind the massive mahogany desk. Two officers instantly pinned him to the floor, and forcing his face into the very puddle of spilled coffee he had been celebrating moments ago. "My legal immunity. You cannot touch me. I am a member of the Senate." Senator Thomas screamed, "Lalai," his voice cracking with panic as the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists. The lead Interpol agent ignored his screams, stepping forward to hand Elena a clean towel while securing the master drive from her hand. "Your immunity was stripped 10 minutes ago by an emergency federal judicial order, Senator," the agent stated coldly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The whole country just watched you abuse a bank employee while admitting to a $3 billion money laundering scheme. The entire financial empire they spent decades building collapsed within a single afternoon. By nightfall, every television screen in Zurich was flashing the images of the elite politician and the senior bank executive being led out of the tower in handcuffs. Their bank accounts were frozen, their luxury properties seized, their names permanently dragged through the mud of global public shame. They had spent their lives believing their wealth made them untouchable. But in the end, their own unchecked pride had built the very gallows they were now hanging from. Elena walked down the broad granite steps of the Zurich Private Bank's main entrance. A cold winter wind hit her face, but for the first time in 6 months, she felt a profound sense of warmth as spinning in her chest. Behind her, the massive glass and steel skyscraper looked less like an untouchable fortress and more like a fragile house of cards. Flashing lights of police cruisers painted the financial district in rhythmic pulses of red and blue. Sirens echoed through the narrow streets as the elite executive and the corrupt politician were driven away to separate detention centers. She looked down at her stained uniform, the smell of burnt espresso still clinging to the fabric. She held her head high, stepping into the crowded street, dissolving into the sea of regular people. Justice had not been handed down by the high and mighty from the top floors. It had been dragged up from the dark, damp basement by someone they considered completely disposable. They thought her silence could be bought with a salary, and her dignity crushed with a cup of hot coffee. The elite had forgotten a fundamental law of the universe. The higher an ivory tower is built, the harder it shakes when the foundation decides to stand up. If you ever find yourself sitting in silence, La Sagrada Familia, watching the powerful trample over the innocent in your own workplace, remember, Elena, Remember that an empire of lies is only strong until the first person decides to broadcast the truth. Forget. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your thoughts below to support the pursuit of justice. If you were standing in that penthouse office, La Familia, watching your supervisor pour hot coffee over an innocent co-worker's head just to protect a political elite, what would you have done? Would you have risked your own career, your family's future, your security to capture the truth like Elena did? Yeah. Or would you have kept your eyes locked onto the floor, pretending not to see the cruelty, just to ensure you received your next paycheck? Sagrada Familia. Where exactly does your personal boundary lie between survival and absolute cowardice?